to report.
H.R. 2289, a bill to provide that an eligible facility's request under Section 6409A of the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012 is
Without
not subject to
objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point, so ordered. Does anyone seek to be recognized on the bill? Mr. Carter of Georgia, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to express my support for my bill, the American Broadband Deployment Act of 2025. This bill brings together proposals from my Republican colleagues to cut red tape and speed broadband deployment. It streamlines approvals for new infrastructure by ensuring fees reflect actual cost, setting clear and timely permitting deadlines, and giving providers relief if they are wrongfully denied access. It also simplifies upgrades to existing infrastructure, like adding 5G, replacing copper with fiber, and deploying Open RAN, especially in areas that have already undergone environmental or historic reviews. Finally, it removes unnecessary environmental reviews for projects in previously disturbed rights-of-way and for replacing untrusted Chinese equipment, reducing delays that often take years on federal lands. These reforms will accelerate investment, lower barriers, and help connect all Americans. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Dr. Rios, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we consider these permitting bills today, I want to raise serious concerns about provisions in this bill, H.R. 2289, that would create broad exemptions to the National Historic Preservation Act, exemptions that could put tribal history, cultural sites, and sacred lands at real risk. The National Historic Preservation Act is one of the few safeguards that ensures tribal nations have a voice when federal actions or major projects threaten places of deep cultural, spiritual, and historical significance. Weakening those protections would undermine that voice and diminish the federal commitment to tribal consultation. And there is a troubling contradiction here. You know, you can't say you respect tribal sovereignty while advancing legislation that strips away their sovereignty by removing tribal participation and tools to protect their lands and heritage. Streamlining federal processes is a goal many of us share, but efficiency cannot come at the expense of stripping tribes of their sovereignty, their self-determination, and sacred cultural and historic sites. It cannot come at the expense of cultural preservation. And it cannot come at the expense of the nation-to-nation relationship that defines our trust responsibility. Tribal sovereignty is not a procedural inconvenience. It is a matter of justice and fairness, and it's encoded in our Constitution. It reflects centuries of history and commitments made by the federal government, commitments that require transparency, consultation, and partnerships. Moving forward with this legislation that affects tribal lands without ensuring tribal participation, ensuring their sovereignty, strong protections, adequate resources, and meaningful consultation is not just misguided, it is inconsistent with the values and responsibilities that Congress is obligated to uphold. If we truly want to support tribal nations, then our policies must reflect that commitment. That means upholding their sovereignty, respecting their history, and ensuring that federal permitting decisions are made with tribal governments, not around them. That is how we achieve progress that lifts all communities instead of leaving some behind. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill? For what purposes does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek to be recognized?
Mr. Chairman, I wish to be recognized on the underlying legislation.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My legislation, H.R. 5273, the Broadband Competition and Efficient Deployment Act, was included in Representative Carter's American Broadband Deployment Act of 2025. The Broadband Competition and Efficient Deployment Act removes the requirement to prepare an environmental or historic preservation review in order to add or upgrade wireline facilities. It is critical that we remove these unnecessary review requirements that tend to delay or even prevent broadband deployment in the rural areas where it is most needed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Carter, for your hard work on this important legislation that takes the next step in ensuring broadband access for all Americans. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. A further discussion on the bill? Mr. Fry, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to highlight a key provision of within H.R. 2289, which is my legislation, the Trusted Broadband Networks Act. Across the country, as we have seen, small and rural broadband providers are working to remove telecommunications equipment that the federal government has deemed and determined is a national security risk. These providers want to replace that gear with trusted, secure equipment, but they are being slowed down not because of technical challenges, but because of federal red tape. Right now, providers must navigate full-blown environmental and historic preservation reviews simply to remove equipment that has already been designated as insecure. That makes no sense. If something in our networks is confirmed to be a national security threat, it should not take months of paperwork to get it out. The Trusted Broadband Networks Act solves this problem. When a provider removes insecure equipment and replaces it with trusted equipment, that action should not be treated as a significant federal action that triggers lengthy NEPA and NHPA reviews. That's it. This provision is very narrow, it's targeted, it's fully aligned with existing federal authorities, and it applies only to equipment identified under federal law as insecure. This is especially critical for the small and rural networks that serve communities like those I represent in South Carolina. These providers don't have extra crews sitting around waiting for permits. They're trying to comply with federal requirements and protect their customers. They should not be punished with more delays for doing exactly what the federal government told them to do in the first place. Every month of delay is another month adversary-linked technology stays in American networks. This provision puts national security ahead of bureaucracy, ensures rip and replace happens on schedule as Congress intended, and helps rural America stay connected and, most importantly, secure. I'm proud to have this language included in H.R. 2289, and I strongly support its passage. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion on the bill? Mr. Hudson of North Carolina, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Listen, before Thanksgiving, the Communications and Technology Committee marked up dozens of bipartisan bills to fold into this package, all with the same effort of expediting permitting to enable better access for all Americans in all communities. In a community like mine, spanning from Fort Bragg to the business districts of Greensboro, with rural areas and small towns in between, you have to have broadband access for work, for education, for healthcare, even checking in with loved ones. Too many folks in our community have been waiting way too long to get broadband access. The BEAD funding is great, and that funding is finally getting out the door after years of delay under the Biden administration. But money's one thing, but if you have to wait years through duplicative processes, the money's not enough. And so what we're saying is we're not taking away environmental reviews. We want to protect the environment. We want to protect our citizens. And the issue my colleague on the other side raised, tribal sovereignty, is an important issue to us. And so we preserved all of those reviews. All we're saying is you shouldn't have to duplicate them. You shouldn't have to do them more than once. If you've got a tower and you need to replace the antenna on it, you shouldn't have to wait years to do a new environmental review. All you're doing is unscrewing one antenna and screwing another one in. But under the status quo, sometimes that takes years of delays. We don't want to do anything to interfere with tribal sovereignty. We don't change anything about the review processes. We just put a shot clock on it. So a tribe can certainly deem that something is not safe for the environment or for their people. But all we're saying is let's provide a shot clock. Let's give a time limit so there's a little bit of certainty so that we can get this broadband in the ground. So I look forward to seeing broadband to more Americans very quickly. with the passage of this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to support it. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. McClellan, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speaking to the bill. Today, I wish that we were considering bills that addressed all of the real and pressing challenges in deploying our broadband infrastructure, which we all agree needs to be done as quickly as possible so that no community is left behind. Yet this bill does not reflect the seriousness of all of those challenges or the bipartisan cooperation that they demand. We should be working in a meaningful way in which both sides have input, and the final legislative product reflects our shared values and priorities. Instead, this package is one-sided policies that will lead to burdensome and likely infeasible regulations and requirements on state and local government permitting officials that amount to an unfunded mandate. I am sure that you heard during the committee hearings that the biggest barriers to broadband deployment are inconsistent pole attachment processes, disputes over rights of way, and a lack of sufficient personnel that are the real barriers to broadband project timelines, increase deployment costs, and undermine the timelines for getting communities connected. This bill does not address those issues. The only path forward is a common-sense bipartisan federal framework that supports cost transparency, establishes predictable and fair joint-use protocols and timelines, and ensures adequate investment in state and local permitting staff who are already overburdened by other jobs, particularly in our rural areas, trying to meet all of the requests that they get with insufficient personnel. This bill puts even more of a barrier on them without any additional resources. There are practical solutions that would remove these recurring obstacles, accelerate build-out, and provide long-term scalability. And I remain ready and willing to work with the majority to produce legislation that addresses all of these issues that remain barriers. Hopefully, we can get that done, but this bill doesn't do it. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Further discussion on the bill. Ms. Berrigan, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks. I hope to strike the last word. Mr. Chairman, 2 weeks ago, I raised serious concerns about the deemed granted provisions in this bill. These provisions impose rigid federal shot clocks on state, local, and tribal governments. Miss the deadline, and the application is automatically approved, no matter the risks or the consequences for the people who live in these communities. My Republican colleagues advanced this bill out of the subcommittee anyway, without a single change to protect local communities. Let me share a few real-world examples that illustrate why these shot clocks don't work in practice. My office recently heard from a Wyoming County Commissioner who explained exactly why the FCC should not become the prime decision maker for broadband installation in their public rights-of-way. Anyone who's driven through rural America knows this well. Rural roads are often narrow, uncurbed, and maintained by part-time crews. Drainage ditches run along nearly every township road, and underground agricultural systems are highly vulnerable to accidental cuts. In places like this, one mistake can wash out a road, flood a field, or take out the infrastructure a whole community depends on. This commissioner, responsible for a county covering about 4,000 square miles and 600 miles of roads, describes the stakes, and I'm quoting, "This makes it challenging to monitor the activities inside rights-of-way, especially if the county is not the decision maker concerning placement and installation of infrastructure. If this potential law is codified, the county would, in essence, no longer be in charge of our roads' rights-of-way. We would essentially be at the mercy of infrastructure owners as to how we might go about performing our statutory defined duties associated with roadways in our counties. When a private party can dictate the operations of the government agency responsible for roadways, something has failed. The people who elect county officials expect those officials to perform their duties without seeking permission from private enterprise," end quote. This isn't just a theory. This county commissioner is telling us that federal shot clocks would give private companies more control over local roads than the elected officials responsible for them. These are the same rural counties that my Republican colleagues claim to champion. That should alarm every member of the committee. We also heard from a suburban county in the Midwest. They typically complete permit reviews for simple broadband infrastructure projects in about 15 working days. This is not a slow county. They are efficient and proactive. But as their county commissioner explained, BEAD-funded broadband infrastructure projects are far from simple. They can stretch for miles across multiple jurisdictions, and a single contractor could submit multiple massive applications at once, covering entire highways and segments. Local officials need time to make sure that digging doesn't damage roads, disrupt water or sewer lines, or create safety hazards for drivers. Federal shot clocks would force these officials to rush approvals on large, complex projects, ignoring local expertise and putting communities at risk. The lesson is clear. The bill assumes local governments are too slow. But even in efficient counties, rigid federal deadlines could create real-world risk and unsafe outcomes. These are real stories from real counties, rural and suburban. They all show the same truth. The federal shot clocks force local governments to gamble with public safety and surrender control to private companies. We should empower local communities, not strip them of authority. We should respect local expertise, not override it, and we should never put local governments at the mercy of private companies. For these reasons, I strongly oppose this bill and urge my colleagues to do the same. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Further discussion? Mr. Griffith from Virginia, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I understand the concerns of local government, but for some reason, the local governments sometimes have failed to read the full text of the bill, because it says they must approve or deny. And if they deny, they need to state a reason. So in the examples recently given, if there were in fact a problem with having been inundated by one company with hundreds of requests, they could deny a significant number of them, claiming that they need more time. They could deny them based on the fact that they think that may cause them problem with their road areas, that they need to be able to look into how this will impact narrow roads if it's a rural area where the roads are narrow, or they've got other infrastructure issues. The problem has been is that they get no answer. Somebody files the request and there's no answer. It's not a yes answer. It's not a no answer. It's just a non-answer. If there is some information that the county or the local government needs in order to process further, they can deny it and say we can't process it at this point and must deny because we need more information on erosion if you're going to be digging, or we need more information on how your installation will affect our local road system. All of that's permissible. This bill doesn't change any of that. It just says, instead of placing the request into a black hole, you have to give us an answer. You can answer yes, you can answer no. If you choose to put the application or the request for the permit into an obscure box somewhere and never get around to answering it, then the answer is going to be a yes under this bill. That's true. But they do not lose the ability to say no because we need more information on erosion, on impacts on our road system, on X, Y, or Z. All of that's permissible. It just says tell us why. Because what I suspect may happen is that if the request or the concern is one that can be answered by the permit applicant, they may go out and spend the money to get data to help the county make that decision. But right now, they don't have a clue. They don't know why they're not getting an answer. They just know they're not getting an answer. And that leads them to suspect, Mr. Chairman, it leads them to suspect that maybe they just don't want to deal with the issue at all, or maybe they have other interests in mind. I mean, there are some of our public utilities that also provide internet. Are they afraid of competition? Maybe. Those aren't legitimate. But concerns about roads, concerns about other infrastructure, concerns about erosion if there's digging taking place, nobody's going to question that those are legitimate, and they can deny with this. And then if those issues can be resolved, the applicant can reapply at a later date. So these are not unreasonable, and they don't force an automatic yes if you give
and negative answer. It only forces the automatic approval if you choose not to respond at all. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the bill? Gentleman from New Jersey, you're recognized to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Chairman. And here we are again. The party that claims to be in favor of small government and states' rights is once again explicitly undermining state and local government's authority to protect their communities from harm. Automatic approvals hold the potential to threaten the safety of local communities and the workforce installing this infrastructure. Republicans are imposing unrealistic timeframes on understaffed local governments to conduct permit application reviews, which, if not met, are automatically deemed approved without granting them any additional resources. House Republicans are doing nothing to support local and state governments after imposing these unrealistic shot clocks. That's probably why organizations that represent local government, such as the United States Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, the National Association of Counties, and the National Association of Telecommunications Officers and Advisors, strongly oppose the American Broadband Deployment Act, as they believe it represents another attempt by this Republican majority to take away authority and power from local governments to do that which they see is best. And so, I've been hoping for consistency from my friends across the aisle. They have yet to show it. This party is going to harm all of the municipalities, counties, and states that we work with and have the good fortune of representing. For that reason, I'll be a no and urge my colleagues to vote no as well. I yield back. I would yield to my great colleague from California.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to the argument that was made that local government could just deny it. They're not forced to approve it, they could just deny it. Under this argument, they won't have the ability to say, hey, we need more time. You're just saying, keep denying these applications, and they're gonna have to reapply every 60 to 150 days until they have enough time in the process. That would be an expensive ordeal, and talk about inefficiency. So I think that's just a poor argument, and why I continue to oppose. With that, I yield back to the gentleman.
Thank you. And I would just ask my colleague from Virginia, he talked about all these instances where these requests are put into a black box. I'm just wondering what data he is looking at that shows what percentage of these requests end up with no response, and what percentage of time that these requests are made does that happen? And if he has that information that he can provide to all of us on this committee. Can we use names? I don't know if I can use names of colleagues.
Are you looking for an amendment?
No, I'm asking my colleague. He had made a series of points about that there's all these instances where things go into a black box. And I'm just asking if he has data available to share with the committee members as to how often that happens and what percentage of requests receive no response.
Yeah, you yield him time to answer the
Yeah,
question?
of course.
Okay.
I would say to the gentleman that I don't have specific data, but that the complaints are numerous, and it is a consistent problem, and it's part of what we're trying to solve in the bill is to make it so that broadband is more accessible in large parts of the country, particularly in areas like mine that are extremely rural and have less opportunities and less competition. We're trying to bring more competition and more opportunities to have broadband available. It's still going to be difficult to get it to every part of my district, but all of the impediments you've heard of in this bill are ones that are addressed to try to make this a smoother process. And I would just have to say that that's the reasoning behind this, and understand that if there's a denial, the denial has to come with a reason for that denial so that there's some understanding of what's going on.
Thank you, and I'll just reclaim my time. You mentioned that do you have one instance, specific instance from your district where there is an impediment that you could share with us?
And I would say to the gentleman, because I'm not in the business of doing this, I can only share what has been brought to me by various companies, but it has been a consistent issue in several areas. Now, there are other areas where
I'll
we've
reclaim my
had great
time.
cooperation with the
reclaim my
utility
time. It's
companies.
always prefer to speak with specificity. I yield to my colleague from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would argue that in many of the rural areas, particularly in Virginia and the gentleman's district, The biggest impediment is the lack of funding, which we are working to address. Difficulties in getting access to poles to attach the facilities you need to run the equipment, which this bill doesn't address. The railroad crossings, which we have addressed, but putting more of a burden on local zoning officials without giving them more resources to address this is not going to make broadband go out in those districts any faster. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. Time has expired. Is anyone seeking discussion on the bill? Seeing no further discussion on the bill, Seeing no discussion on the bill, what purpose, so amendments are in order. So what purpose, gentlemen from Louisiana seek recognition? The clerk will report the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk labeled provisional _01.
The clerk will report the amendment.